So let's talk about the national economy, if we ever get our arms around this thing, and how it's changed over the years. Well, let's go back briefly to roughly the end of World War II. At the end of World War II, we remember that Germany had been bombed and under siege for years and lay in ruin. Most of Middle Europe had been under siege and in ruin. Britain had been bombed, so had Japan. Most of the industrialized nations of the world at that time lay in total devastation except the United States. We could outproduce, with our manufacturing and industrial capacity still intact, all the other nations of the world combined at that time. States like Ohio and Pennsylvania and New York could outproduce most of the nations of the world. And so, beginning roughly in 1950, for the ensuing 25 years, we had an economic system that created wealth and imported wealth. And as a result, we had over a 25-year period the most dynamic growth of our economy in both size and quality in the history of our country. During this time, from roughly through the 1950s, we had a 7% increase in our gross domestic product. During the 1960s, a 7% increase in our GDP, and during the 1970s, a 10% increase in our gross domestic product. Job growth during that 25-year period averaged 1.5% per year. Steady, quality increase in jobs. Manufacturing employment gained almost 8 million jobs over a 25-year period. And we made virtually everything at that time. And we made virtually everything that we invented at that time. The system of generating wealth also helped us import wealth. And this goes to how imports and exports affect a nation's state. You know, there's an old saying, trade surpluses are good and trade deficits are bad. And that's true. What we have here is basically a dynamic going on, economic dynamic. I use this to explain when I teach local economies how they work, that all the wealth of a community is in essence in a bucket and gets mixed and churned. It goes back and forth and back and forth. However, communities have to, when they import money to their bucket of wealth, the bucket, the size of the economy will grow. When they buy things, money leaves their local economy and goes to the place where the things were manufactured, the service performed. This dynamic still also applies to nation states. That within the nation, there's economic activity. Money goes back and forth and up and down, and wealth is generated through the formation and creation of wealth. But also when they sell things, when they export products, money flows into the nation. When they import products from another country, wealth flows out of the nation. Wealth comes in as a result of exports, wealth flows out. More money comes in than going out, you do pretty good. Guess what happened from 1950 through 1970? We had trade surpluses for every year. Billions of dollars. We were selling our products all around the world. Very simple principle relative to trade surpluses and trade deficits. That if you have surpluses, you grow dynamically. Japan figured that out. Japan, after World War II, adopted a principle: we import raw materials, add energy and labor and value to them, and export the finished product and retain the value within their country. They did that year after year after year after year, and as a result, from a burned out cinder, became the second largest economy in the world by 1970. Trade surpluses imported wealth to our country. During this period of time, for every dollar we exported, we imported only 75 cents. We made a quarter on every dollar of trade. So things were really going pretty good. But then something started to happen. And there was a tipping point. Keep in mind the U.S. economy is like a giant battleship. And once that battleship has a heading, it's hard to turn it either way, left or right. It takes a long time to turn that battleship. And we were a battleship heading in the right direction. But roughly somewhere, 1970, 71, between that and 1980, we began to shift. And I personally recognized this shift. I saw it. I was a young man at the time. When I was a senior in college, 1973, I worked my way through college like many of us did back in that era. 1973, I had a summer job working in an iron foundry. Now, this is in Ohio, my hometown of Tiffin, Ohio. And the iron foundry, we made products for Ford Motor Company. We made brake drums, brake calipers, and brake pads. We did a lot of, it's all iron products. And so I had to become a member of the United Auto Workers. And I'm working, the first assignment was to work on grinding wheels. Now what happens is that these castings that come out of the furnace, they'd be covered with sand, then they'd be thrown into a wheelabrator where the sand would be knocked off. They'd come to the finishing area where we were. We run these grinding wheels and we finish off the castings, make the brake caliper, the brake part look really nice and clean and throw them into a bin. Now this is piece time. Now that's P-I-E-C-E. You're paid by piece. So we had basically a base rate, a certain number of dollars, and if you got within in a certain number of units, let's call it 20. If you did 20 units an hour, you got your base wage. In fact, you got paid base wage down to 80%. If you just did maybe 15 units, you still got the base wage. But if you did more than base wage, if you did 50% higher than the rate, you got time and a half for that hour. Now, I'm young and I'm strong and everything else, and I'm knocking this stuff out. Ding, 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 ding. I'm running 150% rate continuously because I have to make money to pay for my college education. Eventually, in the back of my shoulder, turn around, 6'5" union steward. You're spoiling the rate. I said, what? You're spoiling the rate. I didn't know what the guy meant. I said, I'm here just, I'm trying to make money. We're all trying to make money, but slow down. So anyway, I didn't pay much attention to him, so I keep going. So eventually the foreman comes up to me. He says, Bill, yeah, he called me Billy. Hey, we got another job for you. What's that? See that big machine over there with 37 buttons to push? We figure you're smart enough to run that thing. And it was the wheelabrator. Now, the wheelabrator is this big machine where they dump a whole bunch of castings into with a bunch of sand on them, and you punch buttons in the right order, and it throws steel BBs at the castings. It cleans them all up, and then they go to the grinding wheels where they're finished. And so this is the machine. So I'm pressing these buttons, and I'm pretty good at this. I mean, you couldn't get peacetime. I get the, just hourly work, whatever it is, but I kept cleaning castings. Well, one morning, my forklift operator doesn't show up. Now, you need a forklift operator to load the castings into the wheelabrator. When I ran that first load, it was already in the bin. I'm looking around. I said, wait a minute, gee, I don't have a forklift operator, and there's that forklift sitting there. You know what's coming. So I jump on top of that forklift, and I go out there, and I load the castings, I clean them up, and then I haul them over to the finish, and I come back again, and I'm ready to load another one. Whoop, there's that 6'5" union steward again. I said, what are you doing? He said, you're not a licensed forklift operator. I said, well, I know what I got. If I don't load the machine, I can't clean castings. He says, don't you know what you got? What? You got a free day. I stood by that machine for 8 hours. Didn't clean a thing. The grinding wheels ran out of castings within an hour. They stood by for 7 hours. We did nothing for an entire shift. And at that point, I knew something was wrong. Now, in all irony, 8 years later, I'm elected mayor of that city. I'm mayor of Tiffin, Ohio, full-time job, 1980. Strong mayor form of government. In a bad economy, terrible economy. 1982, in walk the plant manager of that factory, along with the president of the union, who was that 6'5" union steward who worked his way up through the ranks. Mayor, we got a problem. What's your problem? We got to close the factory unless the community can do something to help it from being closed. Well, gosh, you must have spent 2.5 months on the thing, and we figured out a way to keep the thing open. And I finally convinced that union guy, hey, he's got to cut back on either your wages or your work rules. And I told him the story. He goes, I remember you. And so we saved the factory for 3 years. Then it eventually closed. It couldn't stay open. But I knew something was happening. And guess what happened? Over the ensuing 30 years, this nation went from a nation that created wealth and imported wealth to one that borrowed wealth, transferred wealth, and lost wealth. And let me show you what I mean. Over the period we saw what the growth of GDP was, this is where it's gone over the ensuing 30 years. I was watching one of the cable networks the other day, and they had financial experts on, the chief economist for Wells Fargo, and another economist was on. The chief economist says things are going to really be good coming around the next year or two. We're going to have 2% growth. And the other guy said, 2%? Don't you realize how bad that is? And the economist from Wells Fargo said, guess what? That's the new normal. This is spooky stuff, folks. Here's our job growth during that period of time, and here's the ensuing job growth. And guess what? Job growth is actually faster, especially during the 90s. It went from 76 to 2000, 1.9%. Over the last 11 years, it averaged 0.4%. But we had some very rapid job growth here. Why? Well, I'm going to tell you in a second. But number one is this. During the 1990s, we created roughly 23 million new private sector jobs. Now, one rainy day, I asked this question. What percentage of the new jobs created in the 1990s paid a wage higher than the national average wage? And the answer, 19%. 81% of the jobs created in the 1990s paid a below average wage. And I saw that, and I did these calculations back in 2002, and I began to wonder why. And the why was very apparent. Number one, because we began a practice of transferring wealth. This goes to government entitlement programs. This chart shows us the total amount of government transfers from 1969 to 1989. The total value in 1989 of all federal government transfers was roughly $600 billion. Today, it will approach $2.3 billion on an annual basis. This is money taken from one group of people and given to another group of people. It has escalated extremely fast. To put this in visual proportion, what I did, I calculated the per capita government transfers and adjusted it to the value of the 2012 dollar. These are adjusted for inflation, and the lines keep going up. This is per capita for Social Security. Now, it would be expected with an aging population, with more people going into Social Security, that the total volume of per capita would increase. And this is Medicare, which is going along real quick, and then it just took off. This is the result of expansion of benefits in Medicare, that the per capita went up. This is Medicaid, medical assistance to the poor. It flatlined here in the 90s, took off again. Flatline is now taking off again. But this is actual welfare. It's very interesting. Remember in the 1990s we had welfare to work, and we began to stop welfare growth. Well, we did for a while. But beginning in 2001, it took off rapidly, almost as fast as the growth of Medicare. The impact of government transfers on our total personal income is significant. Total personal income is all the wealth generated in the United States in a given year by individuals. And there's three different components. This is earnings. What everybody earns is one of the categories. This is passive income, dividends, interest, and rents. But it's passive income. It's rents people get, interest on savings, that kind of stuff. And this is government transfers and government entitlements. In 1970, entitlements were only 9% of total personal income. They've grown now to 18%. What impact? Let me just give you an idea of impact on this. First of all, the growth of government transfers of welfare, Social Security, and all the other things push and form low-wage service and retail jobs. That is the nature of the spending that occurs as a result of distribution of entitlements. But this also has driven certain sectors of our economy. Everyone knows the healthcare industry just has had this rapid growth. And one day I asked the question, where'd the money come from for that rapid growth? And so what we have here is all the money earned by everyone employed in the healthcare industry since 1969. The next thing I'm going to show you is all the government entitlements for Medicare and Medicaid, and see if there's a relationship. The healthcare industry grew in our nation because there was a paymaster. That is the reason why. We have hospitals in Florida where 80% of all their revenue is Medicare. And so it has driven and changed our economy, the transferring of wealth. We've also lost wealth. Let me show you what I mean. We go back to our world trade, the inflow of money and the outflow of money. Trade surpluses are good because wealth accumulates. Trade deficits are bad because wealth flows out of our country. This is the same chart I showed you last time, 1950, 1970. 1971, guess what happened? 71 and 1972, we had trade deficits. Now, I went back as far as I could find the data. We had trade deficits during World War II because we imported raw materials, made tanks and ships and uniforms, and then we shipped out. We didn't export or sell anything. We exported military. So we had trade deficits during World War II. We had a trade deficit in 1932, I think in 1903. But from the Civil War on, I could only find 4 years where we've had trade deficits, except during World War II. Now we had 2 years in a row. So then in the following year, 1975, we had trade surplus of about $8.5 billion. This is back when $1 billion was a lot of money. And then what happened? The ensuing 10 years, we had trade deficits. And they began to grow to the point in 1985 of $120 billion. That's nothing. This is what it is now. This is that last year that we had a trade surplus. Over the last, more than $10 trillion of our wealth has flowed out of our country since 1990. Anybody in this room give me a buck if I give you $5? Anybody give me $1 if I give you $5 back? Who raise your hand if you give me $1 if I give you $5 back? Yeah, fine. Aristotle taught us you have to tell somebody something 3 times before they hear it. Are you set up for it? You got your buck? Carol's going to give me $1, and I'm going to give her $5. All right. No. It didn't work much anymore. All right. Was that a good deal for Carol? Was that a good deal for me? Trading $5 for $1, and you do that enough times, even Bill Gates will run out of money. Guess what? That's the ratio we have with China. This is our ratio of imports and exports. Remember I said back from 1975, for every dollar we imported, we exported, we imported 75 cents. From 2000 to 2012, for every dollar we exported, we imported from the world $1.60. Japan, $2.23. For the last 12 years, we have averaged, for every dollar they buy from us, we buy $5 from them. The same ratio Carol and I had. So this shows us to whom we have, what countries we have these trade deficits with. The green is Japan, the red is China. We didn't used to have them with China. This is a new thing with China. But it really took off through the late 90s and through the O's to the point that we're at this point now. But we pretty much average now $700 billion a year trade deficits. That is wealth leaving our country. Now there are economists who say, oh, it all comes back. It's just world economy. You know, this is a world economy. It'll all come back. Well, it has. Some of it has. Between the Japanese and the Chinese, they've loaned us $2.2 trillion to fund our federal government. They love credit cards, by the way. They finance credit cards. They love that 13% we're willing to pay on credit cards. So some of it does come back, but principally as loans. So I'm going to put that buck in my pocket before I lose it. Given this chart, it won't be worth much by the time I get done. In the national speeches I give, I'm always asked in communities, what industries should we go after? What are the industries of the future we should try to attract? And the future, go back 6 or 7 or 8 years, but the attitude was our future as a nation will be in advanced technology products. We're the smartest people in the world. We're the hardest, smartest working people in the world. This is our future because this stuff's complicated and it's high value production. Well, that might have been right, but this shows us our import and exports for those high technology, advanced technology products. We go back to 1989. This is what we export. This is what we import, and what was supposed to be our future. In year 2000, we began running deficits. We now run trade deficits in advanced technology products, most of which we invented. Now, these are not T-shirts and tennis shoes, folks. These are high-value products that we should be making and exporting to the world. What happened to our manufacturing employment? Guess what? It went down. We lost 7 million manufacturing jobs since this tipping point roughly in 1975. But as a percentage of the workforce, it went from roughly 23% of our workforce in the United States down to 9% of the workforce. High-value, wealth-productive activity. So I have a couple announcements. On my website, polycom.com, I every year do economic strength measurements for all the metropolitan areas of the United States. I have formulas I've developed, and they're posted on my website. I just posted these about a month ago for this year, economic strength rankings, and you can go there and see your community, your hometown. Go back to Ohio. My hometown's just doing one of those things. Pretty much as I predicted is why I moved to Florida. And I know I'm from Palm City, Florida. I know that you know where Palm Beach is, Palm Coast, Palm Harbor, Palm Springs. You might not know where Palm City is. So I thought I would tell you where it is. Now, when I speak up north, I have to, show them a map of Florida and everything. The way I'm going to show you where Palm City is, I'm going to do what the engineers do. I'm going to triangulate. I'm going to draw 3 lines, and those 3 lines intersect is where Palm City, Florida is. So I'm going to draw the first line, and the first line is the path of Hurricane Francis. So Hurricane Francis, as we Floridians know, was out here as a Category 4, made landfall as a Category 3, hung around for a while, crossed over, it probably hit you folks, and then continued up through into Alabama. Second line is Hurricane Jean, 2 weeks later. And Hurricane Jean was a Cat 4, it came in here about a Cat 3, followed a similar path, went up through the coast of Florida and into Alabama and Georgia. The third line, 18 months later, Hurricane Wilma. Crossing ran through here, and guess what? Right there. An 18-month period, the eye of 3 hurricanes passed over my house. And for you folks in Orlando, 2 of those 3 passed over your house. I'm hurricaned out, by the way. The borrowing of wealth. We've transferred wealth. We've lost wealth, and we have borrowed wealth. This is all the consumer debt in the United States beginning in 1970, coming up to this point. It was short. It was about $800 billion at this point. Now, at this point, there was a political movement, roughly 1994, coming out of Washington, where the national banks were pretty much instructed to offer credit cards to everyone. And there was whether or not they deserved them or not, whether or not they could pay them back or not, there was a mass mailing of credit cards. Many of you probably remember the TV commercial shortly after this about all the credit counseling services that would be available. Well, what happened to consumer credit? It went off the charts, to the point that the American people have now accumulated almost, during this period of time, $2 trillion was borrowed on credit cards and consumer loans and dumped into the consumptive economy. Consumptive economy, low-wage retail and service jobs. The borrowing of wealth. This shows us total mortgages in the United States. And we're coming along here in green. Green is the actual mortgages to the point of roughly 1998. And at we increased roughly 200 to 250 to $300 billion a year in residential mortgages. That's pretty much what we were doing. And so what I did at this point, I began to project what it would be under the same similar percentage increase growth in residential mortgages. That's why I call it normal mortgage absorption. And from 1998 to 2008, we should have added $4 trillion of new mortgages. Well, what happened? Well, what happened about this time, the federal government of the United States began to tell banks you have to loan mortgage money to people who can't pay it back. Subprime mortgages. And they did. And it began to go above what normal market absorption would have been. In fact, this year right here was about $600 billion more than normal. And people finally figured out they can make money on bad loans. And this was the result. We borrowed $5.4 trillion more than normal market demand during this period of time. You know what happened. Property values are driven up. Speculators got into buying houses. Building permits went from, we should never have done 3 million new home permits in 1 year, and that's what we did. Dropped down to roughly 400,000 then. But this is what happened. This flow of borrowed money entered the economy. But that's, the private sector is not the only ones that borrow money. We had the federal government of the United States. We started here in 1971. In 1969 was the last year we actually paid down on the gross national debt. They claim we had a budget surplus in the year 2000. We really didn't after we had to pay the interest owed to the trust funds. But this is what's happened over these years here. And the increase in Medicare, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and this is 2007. Now, what about 2007? I'm not political because both political parties are responsible for this, but 2007 was the last time a Republican president had a Republican Congress under this particular budget year. This is fiscal 2007. What happened after that? Congress plans to borrow more than $8 trillion by the year 2020. This is 2012. It will be, they say, well, it won't be $1 trillion this year. It will be. It'll be more than $1 trillion deficit they will have this year. But these are the projections for the deficits of the federal government under the current budget practice. And guess what? These projections do not include any allowance for an armed conflict, for a national emergency, or any new government program. Now, do you think we're going to avoid any of those over the next 7 years? Deficits will even be worse. So, where's the federal government getting this money to pay for this stuff? And this is chilling. This is chilling. Enter the Federal Reserve Bank of the United States. Federal Reserve Bank, in the year 2011, loaned to Congress $655 billion to pay for its deficits. By the way, tomorrow I'm going to be talking about debt deficits and the balanced budget amendment, and I expand upon this federal debt and its implications that we have. But guess what? China and Japan have not increased their stake in 18 months. They're at $2.2 trillion combined. It hasn't gone up since November 2011. We're running out of places. There's not enough money in the world to finance that debt. In the whole world, there's not enough money. There's not enough money now to finance the debt we're going to have this year. So enter the Federal Reserve Bank in the United States. There wasn't enough money in 2011, so the Fed had to print $655 billion. So far this year, through the month of March, I didn't check the last couple weeks, the federal government is loaning to Congress $10.6 billion a week to pay for its deficits. By October of this year, at the end of the fiscal year, Congress, the Federal Reserve would have printed and loaned to Congress $2 trillion. The printing of currency is the last act of a desperate nation. One of the big time bombs in this. Are you happy you came tonight? Isn't this fun? In 2007, remember that's the last year a Republican president had a Republican Congress. This is fiscal year. The elections were held in 2006, but that fiscal year started in that year. So we had a $9 trillion gross national debt. Interest on the debt that year was $429 billion. Now we have a $17 trillion at the end of this fiscal year gross national debt. Interest would be $420 billion. How's that possible? And this is what is spooky. The Federal Reserve has been, because it's loaning money to Congress, it's been loaning it on pennies on the dollar. This is in 2007, Treasury bills were 23% of the debt, the Treasury notes 55%. But look at these interest rates. In 2007, interest was 5.1% for T-bills, 4.3% on Treasury notes, 7.6% on bonds, and these are inflation-guaranteed notes that they issue, 2.6%. Right now, a T-bill is 0.1% interest, sort of like a passbook savings account. Treasury notes are 1.9%, almost half of what the interest was just in 2007. And Treasury bonds are actually going to be coming down because the Federal Reserve has been buying Treasury bonds and converting them to Treasury notes. This is spooky. The reasons why it's spooky, because within probably, well, I'll make an estimate. Federal Reserve is right now will probably fund at least half of the deficit this year. They might find some money from trust funds yet and find some money from stupid foreigners who would be investing in this. Next year, there are going to be fewer sources for that. So the Fed is going to have to continue to fund this thing by printing currency or raise interest rates. Either print currency, flood the nation with currency, or raise interest rates to attract private sector investors. If interest goes back to what it briefly was by the way, this was 7% in the 1990s. If it goes back to what it was in 2007, remember that interest rate I showed you of $429 billion? It's $900 billion then. interest. Interest will be $1 trillion. Well, by the way, I picked this quote up from Henry Ford. It is well enough that the people of the nation do not understand how our banking system and monetary system, for if they did, I believe there would be a revolution before tomorrow morning. So what happened then with the interest is that once market rate gets in there, probably by 2018, interest on the debt will be $1 trillion. So, yeah, what else? Something to look forward to. What do you have to do? Well, to solve this economic problem, we need to address regulations, rules, fees, and taxes. Pretty simple formula. What we have is a situation in our nation where the regulatory tax climate is simply strangling the productive sector of our country. And it's called creeping normalcy. Creeping normalcy is the negative change that happens slowly in small increments over an extended period of time that if you add them all up at once and go back in time, no one would have ever accepted this. We have reached a point where the productive sector is so burdened with regulations. I liken it to a track race. That, and they go back to the 1950s, we had the fastest runners. Our factory would line them up on a starting line and say, go, and they take off. No one in the world could catch our runners, our production employers. They couldn't come close to catching us. And then, for some reason, we decided to put some weight on their back. Wasn't much. Just carry 5 pounds in the next race. They want, in fact, you can carry 5 pounds. So we say, go, and guess what? They still won the race with 5 pounds on their back. But every year they added 5 pounds. To the point now, our producers are carrying 200-pound weights, and they can't get out of the starting blocks when most of the other nations of the world, especially China and Japan, don't have any weight on their back. I talked to the National Manufacturers Association. They identify some 2,000 regulations promulgated just by the EPA. We need to reduce the cost of production as much as possible, legally possible, at the federal, state, and local level. Enable our productive sector to be competitive again. I do a lot of work in Texas. I remember I keynoted the Texas Bankers Association State Convention. And by the way, Texas, without a doubt, for the last 25 years, no state has done so well the growth of economically and quality high-wage jobs in the state of Texas. Unbelievable economic continuously for 25 straight years. So I asked this rhetorical question to these bankers. I said, why do you think Texas has done so well economically over the last 25 years? It's a rhetorical question. I'm going to answer the question. Some bird stands up in the back of the room and yells, we shoot regulators at the state line. I was going to say you have an abundance of economic freedom. But he was exactly right. The regulatory tax climate is destroying the competitiveness not only of production, but every business enterprise in the United States. Number two, and by the way, I developed this list in 2002. I revised it in 2005, haven't changed it since. This list of 5 things might seem familiar to you when I get to the end of it. But we need an abundant supply of inexpensive energy. We built this nation on it. It drove industry. It drove people. Can you imagine if gasoline was $1.50 on a gallon? Gee, would that cause? Trucking costs would be dropping. Airfares would be dropping. People would be traveling, going there. It would be a dynamic industry. We can't get to $1.50 a gallon. How can we ever do that? Well, you could get to $1.50 a gallon if crude's at $55 a barrel. Well, how are you going to do that? I do a lot of work in Texas, I told you. In one of my last trips before the BP oil spill, I talked to some oil boys over there. So what do you think about this oil stuff? He says, well, I said, can you make any money drilling in the Gulf? And they all smiled. They said, we can make money at $55 a barrel. We'll drill all day long in the Gulf at $55 a barrel. So we can make money drilling on dry ground at $32 a barrel. So guess what? We have, well, you know the story. We have energy reserves in this nation of coal and gas and oil. We could literally become energy independent, but also drive the cost down. Balance the federal budget. Believe it or not, that is key to our economic success and vitality because this deficit every year. It's sucking the vitality out of our economy, the debt that they're incurring, but also it causes the formation of low-wage service jobs, which is diluting the quality of the economy. Make what we buy. People ask me, what are we going to make? Well, take a look at what you buy, and that'll give us an idea. These are in billions of dollars. This is what we imported in 2013. $2.2 trillion worth of product. $313 billion of crude oil. Cut that in half and create more than 1 million jobs. If we cut our importation of crude in half, it's 1 million jobs. Now, we still import from Canada and Mexico, but that's it. We can supply all of our own oil. Passenger cars, 147 billion. Other auto parts, 90 billion. We invented medicinal and pharmaceutical prep, $87 billion. Computers, computer accessories. All these things we could be making here. Now, I went through all the imports, did some calculations. If we could capture half of what we import, just one half of what we import, 9 million production jobs. And take our ratio back to $1 to 75 cents, just like it was in the 1950s. Can we do it? Of course we can do it. If we have the will to do it, and that's the problem. Number 5, and this is the problem, it's the attitude of the free enterprise system. For too many years now, everyone has been taught capitalism's bad. And guess what? Because they believe it, we now have regulations and fees, and we have all of this stuff. Now, that's what we should do. Guess what's going to happen? Good luck, folks. Maximum EPA, maximum achievable control. New EPA regulations coming down. Will cost between $400 and $8 billion of capital investment for utilities and manufacturers to comply. Annual compliance costs of $130 billion. The last time I checked it out last August, 30 coal-fired plants have closed because of anticipating this. I estimate right now 100 coal-fired power plants will have to close because of these regulations. The Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. It's like a sock in the gut to our economy. The confusion regarding employment, we're going to have people working 35-hour work weeks. We're going to cut back to 29 to avoid it, the taxes, the cost of this. There's no way we could have any economic growth in 2014 with the implementation of Obamacare. Industrial production will decline because of EPA, because of taxes and everything else. I estimate that by 2018, we will lose 2 to 3 million manufacturing jobs in the United States, an additional 2 to 3 million. Interest on the debt will grow to $1 trillion, and I think the estimate on that was 2019. It could occur earlier by 2018, and there will be massive tax increases. They will tax everything. Hyperinflation will likely occur, and there will be no private sector economic growth to speak of. Probably, well, who knows, between now until there's a major change, until some of the things we're going to have there. Now, I'm sorry you folks came to hear that message, but the great thing about the American people, put them up against the wall, and maybe they'll do something about it. Most people don't realize this is happening, and that's one of the reasons why we're having this seminar now. I've finished. Do we have time where we need to get Rob on? I'm going to hang it. One quick question then.
Isn't all of our borrowing predicated on our status as the world reserve currency? If we lose that status, does the whole house of cards collapse?
I think a lot of it's political. There's a lot of reasons why a foreign entity would loan us money. I mean, China maintains a 5-to-1 ratio in foreign trade, and they throw some crumbs at us to fund our government. I mean, look at the deal they got. They have trade surpluses with us of almost $400 billion a year. So there's other reasons why they might want to buy our debt. But I think they're also getting skittish about our debt. I think but Europe's in trouble shape anyway, too. And so we might see a flurry of foreign entities buying our debt again because Europe is in such terrible condition to get their money out of Europe. But if we keep printing money the way we are, no, we're not going to survive. I mean, we're purposely trying to devalue our currency right now, and another one of the brilliant things coming out of the current administration. By the way, I don't want to sound political, but there's not one single thing I have seen coming out of Washington in the last 5 years that helps the economy. Not one. And virtually everything coming out of it has hurt the economy. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for inviting me, and I come tomorrow.